Hi everyone, welcome to Masai School. We are a 21st century career-focused coding school. My name is Aman Vats. I'm an engineering graduate from Birla Institute of Technology, Misra. I lead the data structures and algorithm curriculum at Masai School. So let me tell you about this video series. In this video series, we'll be introduced to computer programming. You will learn how to write basic computer programs. You will learn the basic constructs of a computer program, that is data types of variables, conditional statement, loops, functions, everything. And you will be learning this in Python. All right. So this is a very fundamental video to getting started with computer programming in Python. And this video series is actually a part of the pre-course for the full stack developer program at Masai School. And now we have decided to make this course available for all aspiring programmers. So we really hope that it helps you in getting started with computer programming and in Python. So happy coding. Thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome back, guys. So in this section, we'll be looking at functions, which is a very important concept used in programming. So far, we had discussed about how to write loops, how to write conditional statement, that is how to make control flow in your code, and how to write loops. But this is one very interesting concept that we are going to be looking right now. So if formally I could tell you, a function is nothing but a block of organized reusable code, okay, that is used to perform a single action, single task, and basically it provides you a better modularity for your application, and it also allows you high code reusing. Okay, so two features it is used for. So if someone asks you why functions, then it is because of you want to use a particular piece of code, I mean reusable. Okay, you want to make a code modular. So let's look at it. I mean, this formal definition sounds quite complex in the first go, so let's look at it, I mean, one by one, exactly what it means. Okay, so let's look at what conceptually does this mean. So suppose in your program you want a particular piece of code, a particular, suppose line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, a particular piece of code executed time and again. All right, a particular piece of code use time and again. So basically what function basically means is you pre-write that piece of code, you write that piece of code, call it by some name, I mean give it some name, and whenever in your main code, in your other code, whenever you give that name, okay, whenever you mention that name, I mean, let's write it func. Okay, so whenever in your running code, whenever you mention that func, so that particular piece of code, those 4 lines will get called. Okay, so this is a very important concept in program. Basically it allows you to reuse a particular piece of code. Okay, so I'll soon show you exactly what I mean in terms of I mean, how can we use it, what exactly is its use in terms of program. But let's conceptually understand it. Suppose you want to print hello Masai school. Okay, and you want to print it, next line, hey there. Okay, we want to print these 2 lines, and these 2 things are gonna be present many times in your code. Okay, so why not let's name this particular piece of code. So as we have to print, so we'll say print this thing, print this thing, and we'll call this particular piece of code, the snippet of code, we'll call it a name, say print it. Okay, and whenever in our code we use this particular name, print it, this particular snippet, code snippet, gets called. Okay, so there are 2 things. If I mean, trust me, you will be able to understand it perfectly through when we do it in Python. But let's for the time conceptually understand as much as possible. So basically there are 2 things associated with it: defining a function, okay, calling it. So what basically means is you need to define that, okay, these 10 lines of code, I am gonna call it with a name XYZ, and whenever I'll use that term XYZ in my code, those 10 lines will get called. All right. So this is what basically function means. So mean, let's look at exactly how. So basically, this makes your program more readable. Okay. So suppose time and again you want to execute these 4 lines. Okay. You want to implement this particular code snippet on line number 6. You want to again do it on line number 10. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to time and again write it. All you need to do is just name the. I mean, just call that function. Okay. So basically, let's look at it exactly how do we do that. Okay, so suppose we have to time and again uh, write, I mean, perform some task, a logic. So the syntax we define a function is, so as I mentioned, there are two things associated with it, defining a function. So let's see how do we define a function. So this is obviously comment, so it won't get executed. So defining a function. So you write the keyword def space name whatever you want to call it. So suppose I call it print it. Okay, then there are these two brackets, these brackets. Okay, sorry, then a semicolon, enter, indent by 4 space, that is move inside by 4 space, then write something that logic that you want to be called a particular function. Yeah, I hope you remember that I just mentioned that a particular piece of code, suppose 4 line patterns, you want to give it a name so that you can call it time and again. So suppose I give it, suppose in that code I want to mention print hello Masai school, print suppose how are you. Okay, these 2 lines. Okay, so what has happened is now whenever you call that function, I mean whenever you write that name, this name, print it, because this is the name of whatever written inside it. So whenever you want to execute the piece of code written under it, you just write it name, and that function, those piece of code will get executed. So let me show you how that happens. So if I write print it with this bracket, and if I save it and I run it, I hope you remember that we have to write the word Python followed by the name of the program, not UI. Yeah, it did that. Okay, now suppose I want to again, suppose there is some logic written on line number 9, some logic here, some logic here as well, and you again want this to be printed, this particular line to be called. So if you again write print it, let's see what happens. Okay, so you can see it has been printed twice. All right, hello Masai school, how are you? Hello Masai school, how are you? So I hope you're getting the idea. So this is this particular thing, what is doing, what is being I mean, whatever is being happening on line number 8 and line number 12. I'll write it here. Line number 8 and 12 is called function call. Okay, it's called function call. Okay, so basically if I just repeat myself so that you can connect the dots. So basically there's two things that we have done. First one is we have defined a particular piece of code, so we have given a particular snippet of code a name. Okay, so whatever written on line number 5, line number 4 has been named print it, and whenever we use that term, that those particular piece of code gets executed, right? So and this is, guys, this is a very important concept in program. So basically this particular name, this particular name, this print it, refers to this particular piece of code. Okay, so whenever in our code we mention its name, those piece of code which it refers to gets executed. Okay, it got executed. So these two things are called function call, and this is the function definition. Okay, this is called function definition. So this defines what basically this word means, and whenever you call it, those particular line of code gets executed. Okay, let's do some more exercise around it. So let's clear this up. All right. Okay, prepared. Excuse me, guys. Yeah. So suppose similarly, I want to define a function. Uh, Suppose I'm writing func, and what it does is it say print, say uh, size school. Okay. So basically, whenever I say func, this particular piece of code gets executed. Now suppose I don't call it. Okay, you learn that this is function call, as in calling the function which has been defined by this name. But suppose I don't write it. Okay, so what happens now is, so you can see this name has been registered, that okay, there is a function, there is a piece of code which is being named func, and whenever you want to call it, you can call it. But if it has not been called, the program does not show any error or anything. Okay, it just, that particular function just gets executed when it is called, and else it's not. Okay, so basically this makes our code readable, as in suppose I want to print this thing 10 times. Okay, in my code, I mean not at once, in my code, suppose at different instances, suppose on line number 10, again on line number 100, line number 200, if I want to keep doing the same task, I can use this particular name to refer to the code. Okay, so currently it's single line code, so it might not make much sense, but suppose there are 10 lines. uh, this is a Masai school pre-course. It is about Python. Python is a in-demand programming language, and it is used in data science. Suppose I write this. Okay, and now I want to print these, suppose these particular lines in different lines of my code. Suppose this code goes on for 1,000 lines, and I want to print this on line number 80. I want to print these lines on line number 100, line number 500, line number 600. So I don't need to write this code time and again. These particular lines I don't need to write time and again. All I will have to do is I will just write func, and these particular lines of code will get called. Okay, so I hope this has become clear. All that we are doing here is we are just given, this particular line, I mean these particular line, a name. We have called it func, and whenever in our program if we mention this name, these particular lines of code will get executed. Okay, so this basically avoids, I mean saves you from rewriting the same piece of code time and again. Okay, so this is the basic concept behind function. So basically there is one more very important aspect related with functions. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Okay, so this is something called parameters. So guys, if you just got the idea of function, so what basically function is, function is a particular code that we have named. Now what this particular code snippet sometimes does is it receives something from you. Okay, so whenever you call it, you can give it something, that okay, take this as input. Okay, apply your logic on that input and generate output. Okay, and give me that, return output to whoever called it. Okay, so guys, it's like there is some person who has been trained to do a task. You provide it with some input, and it can just do one piece of task. It just knows how to do one task. He has mastered doing that particular task. It takes an input, gives you an output. So I'll give an example basically to develop an analogy. So uh, suppose you have a cook. Okay, suppose you have a cook. Okay, and this cook is expert in making tea. Okay, and suppose this cook just wants one information from you. Is the information is uh, the person for whom you are making the tea, what age that does he or she belongs to. So basically, if the person belongs to 40 to 50, he will add a particular amount of sugar. And if a person is belongs to 65 to 75, he'll add lesser amount of sugar, so on and so forth. So basically, this cooks, what he does is it takes some information called age, generates tea, I mean, let's say makes tea, and gives you back. Okay, gives back to you. Okay, so let me complete my analogy again so that you get all these things clear. Okay, so this is very important, guys, because functions is a very important concept in programming. So let me tell you what exactly is this happening here. So basically, you have cook who is expert at this task, making tea. All he or she needs is you give him the age of the person for whom you're asking to make a tea. Then it will just return you the tea in a minute, I mean in some time. Just this information is required to make the perfect tea, and it gives you back. So basically, what let me draw the analogy. This cook is a function. It's a function. All it takes as input before doing it processing is the parameter that you provide the function. Okay, and all it gives back is the return. Okay, all it gives back is the return thing. So this is what basically the analog is. A function is a piece of code that is made to do one particular task. It just receives something called parameter from outside. I mean, whenever you call it, whenever whomever is calling it, it receives some parameters from outside and returns something, generates something from it. So let's look at how programmatically do you execute this particular thing. Okay, so let's clear this. Let's clear this as well. Yeah, let's get started. So the way you do it is, suppose I'm writing a function to suppose uh, twice a number. So to return square of a number. Okay, so how do you write it? Square num. You name the function. So far it's similar to what we have learned. Def for defining the function. It tells the Python execution that I'm defining a function, name of the function, but in the bracket we write the arguments or the parameter that it will receive. So say value. Okay, similarly, what we have to return, we have to return a value which is square of whatever we'll return. So let's write squared value is equal to value into value, and we'll say return. Don't worry, it's not making much sense right now. We'll just connect the dot in a minute. Squared value. Now let me complete it. I'll just tell you in a bit. So see what has happened, guys. It's very important. If you understand that, it's like understanding a huge chunk. So basically, this square number, we have given a particular piece of code, this piece of code, a name, which is square num. Okay, what this piece of code is supposed to do is it receives something from whoever calls it. It is that chef which has received something with a name called value, and it calculates square of the value. Okay, and it returns the caller the value which is squared the value. Okay, so basically this this is the name of the function, square num. What it will do is it will return a number from outside, number which in this case is just temporarily named value, and it will return square of the value, square of the value, square of this value. Okay, and whoever has called it will receive the value, receive the value. So here we have called it, here we have called it, if you can see, here we have called it square num 5. So it will return something because we have written return something. So we need to capture that on a variable. So we have declared a variable returned value which will capture whatever is being returned by this function. Okay, now if you just print it, so let's print it, print return value. Let's remove it. Yeah, let's try to run this. Yeah, so you can see it has printed 25. So I'll again repeat myself what has happened. So basically this square num is a is is a piece of code that has been given this name square num, which receives from outside something called as value. It works on that value. As you can see, it generates another variable squared num by multiplying value with itself, and then it returns the caller who has called it. Here it has been called, it returns the caller a value called squared value. So we capture that on another variable, and then we can use it in our program. Okay, so if you want to, suppose you want to perform this task on different numbers, so you can provide different parameters here. So suppose I write 3, it will work according to 3. So you can see this particular piece of code is highly reusable. You can provide any value to it, it will work on that value and will generate an output. All right, if you provide suppose 67, and let's say we run this code, it worked on 67. Okay, so you can provide it any input, it will execute this particular piece of code and on that particular input, and will generate an output that you need to capture and use that output in your program to do some task. Okay, so this basically, this is what this value here is called parameter, also sometimes referred as argument, which is being passed here. Okay, and it receives that and it works on that, it returns something, and that's how you use function. All right, so let's look at some more examples of it. So suppose we are writing a function that checks whether number is even or odd. So it will receive something, it will take a number into argument. So let's say I write num. Okay, so it receives something from outside which we are calling num. Okay, the code is if num modulus 2, that is if number is divided by 2 is equal to 0, return true, else return false. All right, now if you just call it, so say I'm doing returned value is equal to even or odd, this is 7, and if I print returned value, let's see what it does. Sorry, yeah, it printed false. Okay, because what we are doing is we are passing 7, this num is receiving that value 7, working on that 7, and since 7 is not a or even number, it returns false. So basically return value capture whatever it returns, so it returns false and it prints there, so it printed false. Okay, so this is one thing. Suppose, I mean, similarly in our program we can use this particular piece of code time and again. Whenever we want to perform a task of finding whether the number is even or odd, we can use this particular piece of code. Okay, we don't need to write this time and again. So basically function improves the reusability and also makes our code readable. Okay, so whenever we are here, we know that okay, this particular logic is being executed, we know the meaning of that logic, and we know that okay, what is happening on that particular step. Okay, so this is functions, guys. Just to wrap it up, I'll repeat myself. A function is like a person, a skilled person who is skilled at a particular task, one particular task. It takes some input from you, some information from outside, and it generates the output for you. Okay, it just receives something from you, receives some input, generates an output, and that output you use in your code. So here we call that skilled function. Okay, even or odd in line number 7 we called it, we provided on its hand, okay, take this 7, do your task and return me whatever you have. So it took that 7 on a value called num, it did a task, and it returned true or false. So you took that whatever it returned on the value called return value, and you printed it. Okay, you can name it whatever you want to say. Suppose I want to name it uh, uh, suppose I want to name it x. So you can use X in your code to perform tasks on it. Similarly, I mean, yeah, I hope you got the idea. Okay, it's just a way to reuse a particular code snippet and applying a logic on different parameters. So yeah, that's pretty much it. See you in the next round.